Okay, my name is Cheyenne Lambert, and I'm doing my report on the injured queen, which was a common name for Queen Caroline, who some of the public felt was injured. She herself felt was injured. Um, and so today I'm just going to give a brief summary of Queen Caroline of Brunswick and her alleged affair. So Caroline was born in 1776 as a princess of Brunswick, Germany. She was the daughter of Duke Charles William Ferdinand of Brunswick and Princess Augusta of Great Britain. Um, Her mother and father constantly fought due to her father's open adultery, and Caroline expressed her discontent with her family, saying that whenever she was civil to one of them, she was scolded by the other, and that she felt kind of like a shuttlecock. Um, she could understand English and French very well, but she only had a higher education in music, and she wasn't able to spell very well. She is known to have dictated a lot of her letters because she couldn't spell them. Um, she was kept very secluded, particularly from men, and not allowed to be around many men, go to most balls, or dance if she was even invited to the balls. She got many proposals, but none came to fruition. She stated that her father forbade her to marry a man that she loved because of his low status. And she is rumored to have given birth at 15, which was unconfirmed. This is a little picture of her. This is probably the most known like outfit that she wears. If you see her in like cartoons and stuff that they made at the time, she was usually depicted with this kind of feather hat or like a feather tiara. Um, Her marriage. In 1794, Caroline got engaged to Prince George of Wales, whom she had never met. George wanted to marry her because Parliament would increase his allowance upon him getting married, and he was well in debt. Caroline was a Protestant who would unite Brunswick and Britain, so he just found her to be a good option. Um, he um, he was actually already married, so this marriage is the legality of it is somewhat contended. Um, Upon their first meeting, Caroline and George were both evidently disappointed in each other. George apparently drank a lot of alcohol, and Caroline just called him fat. Um, George had already had a mistress, Frances Villers. She was Countess of Jersey, and she would become Lady of Waiting to Caroline pretty much as soon as Caroline married George. And George and Caroline married on April 8th, 1795. They both hated the wedding and each other. Beforehand, George got so drunk that he had to be basically carried to the altar. And after the wedding, he basically passed out before consummating the marriage. And Caroline had to just leave him there, or she decided to just leave him there. She kind of hated him too. January 7th, 1796, Caroline gave birth to their daughter, Princess Charlotte, who was second line to her father. The public hated George for his extravagance and loved Caroline for her open nature. They saw her as wronged by Prince George. At this point, the monarchy was also a little bit unpopular because of what's it called? A radicalist movement. In April 1796, George wrote to Caroline informing her that they would no longer have any relations. They had not been living together for a while, but he said that he was so disgusted by her that she didn't take the baths enough or wash herself enough or change her clothes enough that he couldn't even be in the same room with her. So he said, let's limit all contact from now on. Caroline took this as a freedom from the constraints of her husband. She went to live at Blackheath, London. She adopted 8 to 9 poor children, including a 3-month-old William Austin, who her neighbor said to be her illegitimate son, which is unconfirmed. In 1806, a secret commission was developed called the Delicate Investigation to investigate the claims, but they proved nothing either. Even today, there's more evidence that he was not her son. But the affair. In 1811, King George III became insane, and his son, George, became regent. George restricted Caroline's access to Princess Charlotte and socially isolated her with his newfound power. She moved to Conneath House in Bayswater and began a propaganda campaign against George to oppose his ability to prevent her from seeing her daughter. During this, she actually worked with a prominent Whig who wanted George gone. In return, George began smearing Caroline's reputation. Caroline eventually agreed to leave the country, much to the dismay of Charlotte, who saw that it would strengthen George's position. Charlotte took her mother's side in most of these fights rather than her father's. As Caroline traveled, she is said to have had a romantic relationship with Bartholomew Pergami, who was a foreign-born servant. Princess Charlotte married Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, but died in November 1817 in childbirth. The divorce. George was desperate for divorce, but could only achieve it if he proved that Caroline's adultery. Caroline was open to divorce in exchange for money, but she wasn't open to ruining her reputation, and mutual divorce is illegal. So George felt his only option was to prove adultery. George ordered an investigation into Caroline's adultery and prepared short testimonies and witnesses, but the government didn't want the divorce because public support for the government, and especially King George, was low, particularly among the Whigs, and they supported Caroline, who was seen as wronged by this hypocritical monarchy. In January 1820, King George III died, which made George, who is acting as Prince Regent, king, and it technically made Caroline queen, though she was often not. On June 5th, 1820, Caroline arrived unexpectedly back in England to claim her title as queen. Riots broke out in support of her, and she was a figurehead for the radical movement and for political reform. Upon her return, George immediately submitted the collected evidence and allegations found against Caroline, despite the government not wanting it to happen. This is a good political cartoon from the time. It says, "How to get unmarried. Hi, there's the rub." And you can see here that this is Caroline. She's depicted as she usually is, with these little feathers. And King George, they are tied together with this matrimonial knot. George is very clearly trying to get himself free, and his advisors, I assume his advisors, I don't know who these people are, they might be Parliament, I don't know who she is, are trying to help get him free. You can see here Caroline is holding the hand of who I suppose is Lady Justice, with the smoke and the wrapped eyes and the sword. Yeah. Going back to that, sorry. I just feel that her holding the hands with Lady Justice and Lady Justice supporting her really shows how public favor approved Caroline rather than King George. The Pains and Penalties Bill. Upon Caroline's return to England, the government reluctantly introduced a bill of pains and penalties at the behest of George, which hoped to annul the marriage and remove Caroline's title. This bill caused public outcry on behalf of Caroline, who was seen as a woman wronged by a king that they already saw as selfish and extravagant. Caroline became a symbol of an abusive and hypocritical monarchy, and through her, people could critique it without being seen as traitorous to the monarchy or to the king. The second reading of the bill was a trial with witnesses to determine if Caroline had committed adultery. Caroline could attend, but could not speak. She was defended by Henry Brougham and Thomas Denham. The Whigs were already steadfastly against the bill. The Tories feared the trial would publicize the king's own indiscretions, and the clerical lords just wanted the divorce part removed. Caroline's defense rested on Brougham's argument that Caroline was too old and too ugly for any man to have wanted, and the acknowledgement that George had committed similar, if not worse, acts. This acknowledgement of George's infidelity also kind of scared some of the Tories a little bit because they didn't want his indiscretions to get to the public. At the third reading, the majority sank to 9. and they knew that the bill wouldn't make it through the Commons. So Liverpool abandoned it, much to King George's dismay. This is a pretty famous painting of the trial of Queen Caroline. That's what the painting is called. And then this is just a painting of her profile, supposedly during the trial. The aftermath. After the bill was abandoned, there was a great rejoicing celebration. She was widely popular for the next 2 weeks. But on July 19th, 1821, Caroline was refused entrance to George's coronation. She went to every door but wasn't allowed entrance due to lack of ticket. The crowd heckled and hissed at her until she left. She then decided to host a dinner party to show that she wasn't affected, but she promptly burst into tears in front of everyone. After that, she became very isolated, unpopular, and unimportant until her death. This might have been because of a loyalist movement that was rising. It might have been because of criticism over her revealed indiscretions. But maybe her usefulness as a figurehead for radicalism had ended. Caroline died on August 7th, and although she requested to be buried in Brunswick with a coffin that read Caroline of Brunswick, the injured Queen of England, during the funeral procession to a waiting ship, there were disturbances and rioting in which a man was killed. Ultimately, Queen Caroline's affair stimulated controversy over the role of Parliament, highlighted the role and treatment of women, and emphasized a movement of radicalism. And over to the left here, I have a little short timeline of a lot of the important events in Caroline's life. Sorry. And then I have the works cited.